Welcome into a brand new edition of the 06010 ESPN Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Fuse, and we are joined by the one and only Tim Legler, lead NBA analyst here at ESPN, appearing as part of the crew alongside Mike Breen and Richard Jefferson for all the big NBA games, including the NBA Finals on our air. Tim, you'll be on the call this Saturday as part of the ABC triple header, Mavericks, Lakers. What can fans expect from that matchup?
Well, I think right now you're looking at a team in Dallas, obviously, without Anthony Davis, without Kyrie Irving, kind of letting this time of the season be about the development of Cooper Flag and hopefully getting some help, at some point from those all-star caliber players. They play extremely hard. They're not an easy team to play against. You're going to have to show up and be ready to go. For the Lakers, it's been kind of a roller coaster this season. They've had everybody out at some point in terms of their top tier talent. They've only played a handful of games together with Luka, LeBron, and Austin Reeves, and that's not going to be happening in this game because Austin Reeves is still out. But I think for the Lakers, you're looking at a team that on any given night, because of Luka Doncic, LeBron James, and what they bring to the table, they can look like a legitimate threat and contender. Other nights, they've got enough defensive issues that you kind of scratch your head on that. So I think, honestly, for all of us, it's always you sit down and do a Lakers game, like what Lakers team are you going to get tonight? And that's kind of how I feel about this going in. But look, there's a lot of talent on the floor. And the Lakers right now, I think, are determined to try to hit some sort of consistent stride heading into All-Star break. And let's see if the Dallas game can give them some of that, particularly defensively.
You mentioned not knowing what potential team you might have, what they look like on the court when they're actually playing in the game. Is that challenging for you as an analyst to go into it not knowing what Lakers you might get?
Absolutely. In fact, I'll give you the example. Christmas Day, we had the Rockets-Lakers, and I was so excited for the game. For the most part, everybody played. Austin Reeves was the only guy out. And I always joke, 10 teams played on Christmas Day, and one of those 10 decided that they weren't all that interested in playing that day. It was the Lakers because when they play hard and they're engaged, like they have a lot of talent, and you can see why, particularly a guy like Luka and the way that he could control the game, unlike most players in this league. He's just got that rare quality to control the game with the ball in his hands. And they were flat, that day, and it was a letdown because you're anticipating when you sit down to call a game, you're typically anticipating the best of both teams. And that's what your analysis leading into it is geared toward, because you've watched so much film on them heading into a game. You know what it looks like in that spectrum of good to bad for this particular team. And you're hoping that this is a night, as this ball goes up in the air for the opening tip, this is a night they're going to put it all together and play to their best. And that's what you're anticipating. So when you don't get it, yes, it's different. Like the narrative of your analysis changes. And it's not because they miss shots. Like that happens to teams, but it's more about effort, energy, viewing the team as you're calling the game. So yes, it's a dramatic shift if you see a team on a given night that just doesn't have it. It's frustrating because you want to see, games that have two teams on it that look like, hey man, this could be a playoff matchup maybe down the road. This is going to be great. And then one of those teams, for whatever reason, doesn't have it on that given night. That can be very frustrating.
Walk me through, what is the prep like with producers, directors, everyone that behind the scenes crew, and then with Mike Breen and Richard Jefferson going into a game like this?
Yeah, I mean, we will, for the three of us and the production team, you're going to sit down and have, that meeting, usually the morning or the early afternoon, the day of the game, to kind of go over all of your thoughts. Usually there's some text messages that'll go back and forth in the 24 to 48 hours leading up to it, that meeting. But in that meeting is when you kind of give your thoughts on what you're seeing right now with the two teams that you're about to call, and you go over it, and that will help determine, the open for the game when we're on camera for a few minutes, setting up the game. That conversation will kind of frame that. And then there's always going to be, in the 3 days leading up to a game, all kinds of emails come in with information and data and graphics and things like that. And you kind of cherry pick the things that you really like. You find little nuggets of data in there. So that's kind of the collaborative preparation. And then the individual preparation is, I'm huge on watching what these teams are doing lately. So, you might think you know about a team, but I want to watch every second of their last couple of games to see what's changed with maybe they're playing more zone. Maybe they're running a particular set a little bit more than they were earlier in the year. Maybe there's new guys getting minutes in the rotation. Maybe the rotation has changed when they sub guys out. Like there's all kinds of stuff you could pick up more so than just if you've seen them. I saw them 2 weeks ago and I kind of got a good grip on who they are. Things can change with an NBA team, even established teams, over the last couple of games. So I'm big on watching that film, seeing any trends that are happening in real time leading up to the game, and it helps you prepare for what you're about to see. So I'm a huge preparation guy, and I want to not be caught off guard by anything I'm about to see. And I think everybody kind of knows that about me, and that's kind of what it will look like in the 48 hours or so leading up to getting to the arena and ready to call the game.
Yeah, that's the big sense I've gotten about you is just you love to dive into every single game. So, for example, we're recording this on a Wednesday. You're in Charlotte calling the game tonight. There's obviously other games happening tonight. So how will you learn what was happening around the league once you get done calling that game?
Well, yeah, that means you'll go back to the hotel room. Usually you'll have get back to the hotel, and sometimes you'd maybe have a glass of wine and talk about the game you just called and the good and bad of it and how it can be better. And then, at that point, I'll get back to my room and I'll start kind of going through my phone, looking at scores, looking at box scores. And of course, the great thing about, living in this age, you can see every game in its totality, right? So you can go into League Pass the next morning and you can see what game you really probably need to see. Sometimes maybe you only need to see the fourth quarter of that game. Maybe sometimes you need to see the entire game. They have, of course, condensed games, which are great. You can watch a game in 40 minutes, basically cutting out all the fat, like all the dead ball moments, the timeouts, a lot of the action, from baseline to half court. If a guy's walking it up the floor, like all that's cut out. You could just watch the meat. In about 40 minutes, you can see an entire game. So I'll typically, there's going to be a couple games every night that I'm going to need to see that. Prepare for the podcast that I do with All City, or just to prepare me for the next game, or just to stay current on what happened last night, because I was calling a game. You are so laser focused on what you're doing. Everything else in the peripheral in your world is completely tuned out for that 2.5 hours while you're calling the game. So yeah, it's almost like you got to recalibrate yourself to like what else is going on in the NBA while you're doing that. So that's definitely a process that takes place over the next day or so.
What is it like working with Mike Breen?
Man, first of all, it's an honor, to think that I'm sitting next to a guy that I've been admired as long as I have, been following him, watching him, working with him as a colleague, but rarely having a chance really to cross paths and interact over the years, because I was primarily doing stuff in studio. He's calling games. We did, see each other occasionally, but not a ton. And then getting an opportunity, 2 years ago to call a couple of games with him for the very first time. I was sitting there thinking to myself, I can't believe I'm sitting here calling a game with Mike Breen. I felt the same way like back in the day I did the conference finals on radio with Brent Musburger. And I'm going, I'm sitting here with Brent Musburger. Like you're talking about all-time legendary, iconic play-by-play people. I felt the same way about Mike. He's incredible. As good a broadcaster as he is, he's a better human being, and we've really connected on that level. Share a lot of the same interests, same favorite movies, the kids' stories, you name it. He's just a tremendously grounded human being. It's got a lot of empathy and care for the people he works with. I've rarely been around a person that has as much universal regard as Mike Breen does. When you walk into a building, you walk into an arena, you see him interact with other teams, coaches, players, even the people that work at the arenas, because he's been going in there so many years. The way he treats them with respect and the respect he gets back, it's pretty impressive. To think that you're calling a game with a guy that's held in this kind of esteem league-wide.
Do you remember the first time you met him?
I don't remember the actual very first time I met him. At some point, it would have been during the NBA Finals for sure, because typically, even though I was doing studio, I would then travel to the NBA Finals to do my pregame, postgame show, all of that content. And of course, he was there calling those. And it would have been then. I don't remember the exact time, but typically you're on totally different schedules. Like if you're there for the studio crew, you're in a totally different schedule than the game crew. So it's really very much in passing. So that's why this has been phenomenal, and one of the big things that we like to do is you get to the city the night before the game, or usually the mid to late afternoon, the night before you're going to call a game. You get to that city and then, you're setting up dinner. And that's the best part of the job because you're sitting there not only talking about basketball, you're talking about life, and you're getting to know people on a much different level at those meetings. You're preparing for the game, and actually the interpersonal connection that you're developing, that stuff plays out on the air, and it's obvious when the chemistry is there. It's obvious because you spent time together and you learn more about people, and that can lead to an occasional joke on the air because of something that has transpired in the human side of it, not even related to basketball. It helps the broadcast. And that's been really the best part of the gig, man, is spending time with Mike, Richard, the night before the game and hanging out and getting to know them on a totally different level than you did before.
When did you realize that was a big recipe for this industry in the broadcasting landscape, that really at the end of the day, it boils down to just how great chemistry you have working with it?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much immediately I realized that. And I've called, I don't know how many games over the previous 23 years that I worked at ESPN, because the years 24 and 25, which I'm in right now, 24 last year, primarily calling games. It was the first time I've done that since I've been at ESPN. But I've called games. I mean, one year I did an entire Sunday night package of games, like 15 games on Sunday nights with John Saunders and Greg Anthony. And then I would always be kind of selected, handpicked for certain games. I called Christmas Day games for 4 or 5 years back in the day, a lot of radio. And I learned pretty much immediately that is what's going to determine the ultimate success, because everybody knows the game. We all know what we're talking about, right? So it's really about how seamlessly it can be presented. That only can take place through spending a lot of time together and developing chemistry and a genuine, not only like factor of the person, but a trust factor. That's probably the most important thing, is you have conversations and you're sharing certain things, and now you're building up a level of trust. You're okay. We've shared some stuff here together. This is important, that this is somebody I can trust. And that trust factor carries over to when the ball's going up in the air, we're about to start the game. Like, you trust the guy next to you that he's there for the right reasons. It's not about themselves. It's about the group. And this is only going to be as good as this team makes it. And that is really important in a broadcast, and people watching pick up on that. And you're constantly, honing that and developing that to where then eventually, if you get enough reps together, it does become seamless. And I think we're absolutely, getting into that right now.
Tim, you said in an interview a few years ago, my goal is to try and tell you something, the fans speaking about the game you just watched, that is very important, that you didn't know, and will make the fan smarter next time they watch. How important is that for you as a broadcaster nowadays, especially in the role that you're in?
Well, I'm so glad, first of all, you got that quote exactly right. So that's great. It's verbatim, because that is exactly my approach. It has been from the first time I went on the air at ESPN. Is when I watch a game, I'm fascinated, and sometimes I've joked with people, like, if I'm ever told to talk less on the air, I apologize, because I'm like, I genuinely find every trip up the floor interesting because of something. And so to do that, you have to first see all 10 people at the same time. So even though my eye is trained on, and most people watching the game, you're trained on the action, the strong side, where's the ball, what's taking place at the ball screen or the isolation or whatever it may be. I have always tried, as that action is taking place, I've kind of got a peripheral on what's going on the weak side of the floor, because there's something that's going to have an impact on how the success or failure of this play. Those are the kind of nuggets I'm trying to find. And it might be a stretch, honestly, a 5-6 minute stretch in the third quarter that to me was the most significant stretch of the game, even though it ended up being a really tight game in the fourth quarter and was decided by one possession, without this 5 minutes that took place in the third quarter for these reasons, we wouldn't even have been in that situation where we have a one possession game. And that's why, for me, that was something really important. The details in that are what I'm trying to find. The angle of a pass, the timing of a ball reversal, a guy not boxing out someone that's got a free run at the 3-point line at an important time in the game. I'm always a guy on the weak side's eyes turning your head at the exact time he was supposed to rotate, and he's a half second late. Why did that happen? Those kinds of things I think are interesting to fans because they're not hearing it all the time, and it does make them smarter the next time they watch a game, or even the next trip up the floor. It makes them smarter, something to look for. And those are the kinds of things I'm trying to find because I think it makes the broadcast more interesting.
Tim, before we get to the Fast Five rounds, you appeared regularly on Mike and Mike back in the day. What was those moments like when you would go on there, and did you ever realize just the power of ESPN radio giving you that kind of exposure to that reach of an audience?
Yes, I absolutely did. And one of the things, I know that was a huge breakthrough for me, some of those segments. And, those guys, I felt like if I was on campus, they wanted me in there, and it was great. It was a great feeling. I even co-hosted with Greeny a number of times over the years if Golick wasn't there. And that was a blast because I could even talk about other sports or other topics. I think one of the things it allowed me to do was show my personality, like my sense of humor, my wit, like some of the things that interest me, and some of the segments we would get into, because obviously that was a big part of their show. And sometimes if you go on SportsCenter or you're doing studio analysis, like you don't have a lot of time. So then they're bringing me on because of what I just said. They wanted me to do a film breakdown or talk about the game in a context, and it's a short period of time before you got a producer in your ear saying, okay, wrap, so you got to get it in. On that show, it's a little bit more free form. So an answer of a question could lead down a totally different path than what they intended. And it's a 15-minute segment a lot of times. So it just allows you to inject a lot more of your personality. And I think that was very important for me because I think the people that know me in my personal life know I'm silly and I try to be funny, and I'm usually the guy that's trying to make everybody laugh in the room. And it's hard to see that sometimes in the context of doing serious basketball breakdown. That show allowed a lot of my personality to come out, and I think that really helped me in terms of breaking through in my career.
When you were doing a show with Greeny, when it was just you two, what did you learn most from working with him?
Well, I just think the guys that do it at that level, that are studio hosts at that level, particularly that early in the morning, it's amazing to me, like what he was on top of. He's not coming in there at 4:00 in the morning and the show's on at 6 or 7 or whatever time it started. He's not coming in there at 4:30 in the morning and they're just handing him notes to catch him up on what went on in the world. Obviously, in that job, like he's got to go to bed at a certain time or he's going to be a zombie. So, a lot of the live game watching is very difficult when he was doing that show. So I'm like, how does this guy know all of this? Like, how is he this on top of what's going on, not just in the NBA, because I'm on there that day, but across the entire spectrum of sports? Just so talented, so much admiration for him. He's been one of my biggest mentors at ESPN. I've gone to him with many things over the years and asking his advice on career things. And I know he's been one of my biggest believers and supporters, and he has had a huge role in the impetus for different things I've done in the ascension of my career. I owe a lot of it to him because of direct help with being on his shows, but also stuff behind the scenes and conversations we've had.
That's phenomenal. Tim, this is my favorite part of any interview I do. It's the Fuse Fast Five. It's 5 quick questions. Are you ready?
Let's go. Let's rock and roll.
The biggest misconception fans have about what NBA analysts actually do day to day.
I think people kind of think we just watch a little basketball on the side and show up and do our 2.5 hours, and then that's it. And then we're go home with our families and it's on to the next day. I don't know if people understand how much we're living this when we're not on the air and how much time you have to spend watching games and catching up. And if you got families, and I've got a young son at home, that means spending your family time. Everybody goes to bed And now here I go. I've got to watch these two games that I taped at 11 o'clock at night. I'm starting that. So it's just a lot more exhaustive and a lot more commitment to, I think, to what you're doing. If you want to do this at a high level, particularly at a place like ESPN, at the worldwide leader, man, you've got to be on top of your game. And the sacrifice that you make personally is a lot more, I think, than anybody would envision.
One of the first lessons you learned after transitioning from the NBA to becoming an analyst on TV?
I think one of the first lessons I learned, make sure your seat you're sitting in, if you're on a studio show, at the desk, the mechanism on the side that raises and lowers the chair is operating properly. I did a segment very early, might have been my first year at ESPN, where the chair, I went to adjust it, and it collapsed flat. I went flat down almost on the ground as the chair went down to the ground. I'm behind the desk. All you can see is basically my eyes. We're about to come out of commercial break. I took the chair and I kind of kicked it back away from me, and I did an entire segment basically sitting there as if I was, catching at a Major League Baseball game, and went to commercial break. No one knew anything about it, and I stood up and I could barely walk because my quads were firing to that extent. It was like doing the wall sits back when I was playing for the Utah Jazz and Jerry Sloan had to sit on the wall for 5 minutes for a defensive stance. It felt a lot like that. So that's one of the first lessons that I learned. Make sure that chair is functional, or else you could live on some blooper reel for the rest of your life.
That's great advice. One change in the NBA media landscape over the last 25 years that has surprised you the most?
I think the rise of the hot take debate type shows and how that's become a big part of where people kind of find their NBA information. And like those debate shows absolutely are entertaining and they serve a purpose without question. I've been on a lot of those shows and I actually watch those shows too. If you'd have told me, 15 years ago that would exist, because you think about it. I mean, we didn't have podcasts to this extent back then. We didn't have the ability to go stream whatever you want, whatever content, whatever information you want. It's a good thing, obviously, for a lot of careers and just for information. I just didn't know that it would necessarily rise to that level, like when it first began. I thought that people are going to still find other content, all of it in those traditional spaces on television, and there's a lot of doors open out there, and it's been great for a lot of people. But it's surprising.
And then the last one for you, Tim. You're known as a 3-point shooter. What are your thoughts on a potential 4-point in the NBA?
Hate it. Would never want to see it, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because there's already enough guys like with the green light, I think, to shoot 3-point shots that maybe have a little bit more discretion and went back to the 3-point attempts that we have on a nightly basis. And now you add a 4-point shot to it. I think you're gonna have a lot of guys, I think, probably entertaining that probably shouldn't. That space that would be a 4-point shot should be reserved for a handful of guys in the league that can shoot that shot at a really high clip. So I think it would lend itself to maybe more possessions where we have more guys dipping their toe in that water that maybe shouldn't.
Well, Tim, this has been so much fun. Thanks so much for the time this morning during a busy stretch for you. Best of luck this Saturday on the call for Mavs Lakers. I'll be watching. Best of luck, and thanks again for your time today.
Appreciate it very much. Thanks for having me.